Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett. A little flute because you just never know when these things actually go live. And I'm trying to avoid that thing of looking like, which probably happened anyway. I hope you're doing well. It's certainly crazy times. Today is, if nothing else, a numerological exercise of fascination because it's 7/7/2020. And so do with that what you will. And going live here at 11:11 a.m. because why not play when the muse is around? I'm super excited to bring on for me, a new friend and an astrologer who I've been really excited to recently have been turned on to. He's doing such amazing and unique and innovative work. And I want to introduce to you Mychal Bryan. And Mychal, as I do, please also unmute yourself. And good to see you.
Good to see you, Gemini Brett. I'm really happy to be here with you right now.
Right on, man. So Mychal is of the Oraculos Astrology School, which you can find online, and the True Divination podcast, which I was really honored to record an episode with Mychal some time ago. And we got to talking, and I was like, wow, I just want to do this all the time. So recently, I was asked to host an astrologer or two who will be speaking at the upcoming Queer Astrology Conference, which is July 10th to the 12th. And so when I saw your name on the list, I was like, oh, Mychal. So I was really, really glad that this could line up and that you could be available for a short conversation today in these crazy times, man. Thank you so much for being here. What's alive for you?
Uh, wow, Brett, these are really crazy times indeed. And I'm just trying to stay on top of the wave because I think that right now it's either you're on top of the wave or you're under the wave. But either way, we have to interact with it. And so I'm really fortunate and blessed, I think, to be able to still be doing the things that I love when so many people, just let's talk about like the whole quarantine situation. So many people are without jobs right now as a result of COVID-19. And so during this time, I've been able to continue doing the things I love.
We broke up a little, Mychal, so I'm gonna fill in that gap until your internet sorts itself. But I've got you frozen. So yeah, I mean, just to speak to that, there's a lot of people who even have been deemed non-essential, which I mean, I just can't imagine really the pain of that. I'm honored to sit with so many clients who have, in the last few years, faced the necessity to change their lives. And many of them left behind jobs where they were successful and more of like a square world. I'm speaking also to my own experience when I say that. Um, and yeah, it's been fascinating to be with like many people during that transformation, during that gateway, during that shift. And it's also such a beautiful thing now to see. It's such a lift to see when I'm connecting with people. It's like, we were talking a few years ago about how I wanted to quit that job and start this thing, and well, I did, and now that I did, um, it's interesting because if I had stayed with my old job, like I wouldn't be working now. And now that I have shifted jobs, I can still work. So it's definitely an amazing blessing in my world to be able to do what I've done for so many years as an astrologer,
Mm-hmm.
even during these times. Oh, nice. Mychal, you're back. All right. Well, I just kind of filled in the gap. Do you want to share your camera?
I am going to start doing that in just a bit.
Okay.
I'm in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, and oftentimes the internet is kind of funky, but I'm coming right back in right now.
Okay, cool. I could also just put up like a still shot and we could go audio only if the internet doesn't allow for video, which is totally cool. So let's see how it plays. But while you were away, I was basically speaking about, this the beauty of
Hmm.
being able to work even when this world is getting shut down. And I mean, I know this is true for you too, because we were having a hard time finding a moment, an
Hmm.
hour where we're both available because things have been really busy. Because this is certainly a time where people are looking for advice. And I think that a beautiful thing that's happening is that folks are understanding, at least on some level, that the places where we've gone for advice traditionally maybe aren't working so well anymore. I wonder too if astrology's gotten some credit because I think a lot of people heard astrologers saying 2020 is going to be so real and get ready and all these things, and so I
Hmm.
think that a lot more people are starting to look to astrology. Um, so yeah, why don't Mychal? Why don't I'll just share this still image of us, and then I'll stop my video too, and we'll do like audio style. Does
Um,
that sound good?
okay, I mean we can try the video thing one more time and see if that's
Okay,
going to, yeah.
give it a go.
Okay, good stuff. Let's see. Mm, there we go.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. This is
Yeah,
this is the struggle of living on an island in a small island nation. But thank you so much for being patient,
I imagine there are many pros to living in a small
Brett.
island nation right now. And let's go there. But before we do, there a piece that I touched into this. It is a blessing that we can work right now.
Hmm.
That being said, I also understand on another side of your work, you're closing down a yoga studio,
Right,
and I
right.
imagine that's at least somewhat catalyzed by the shutdowns and all that right now. But
Most stuff.
so many people right now are being deemed non-essential.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that that's something that we need to go into and embrace and open up and not run away from. I mean, I'm
Right.
exploring from myself, like the privilege, the blessing of being able to work during these times. And I was just saying when you were off, like I'm so many of my clients, it's cool because I've seen them make this really hard shift, this like jump from the old square world where like they wouldn't be able to work right now into like their own business or whatever, and they are able to work, and so it's cool to see that shift in many ways. Um, but maybe you could share some thoughts about what it is to be deemed non-essential, maybe how some of that's in the astrology right now, and how we come out of that. Oh no, Mychal, I lost you again. So let's stop our videos. We'll see if maybe that can help. Mychal, are you on? Oh, there's now your video is working. Wait. Do you want to stop your video and we'll just try this still?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
Okay.
let's let's just do that.
All
Okay.
right. Cool. Well, now I hear you. Now
Good
that people
stuff.
can hear you, that's where we want to be. Yeah, so
Good
what do you
stuff.
think about this pain of being deemed non-essential?
Well, Brett, I really think that a lot of the people who have been considered non-essential are really the people who are actively keeping people's lives together right now. And I think about how much yoga has been offered online during these times, as well as how much dance has been offered online, and so many other things that don't seem to be directly essential because it may not be connected to the medical profession, or it may not be connected to other quote unquote essential jobs. Like, we've really been keeping people sane. I mean, those of us who do the yoga and the dance and the music and the astrology and the counseling and the the interpersonal work that so many of us do with people, we've really been holding the world together to a large degree during this time. And I mean, granted, this whole thing with COVID-19 and places having to shut down as a result of it is really to keep people healthy. So, I mean, on that level, I understand why we couldn't have been open in order to have group classes like we usually do. But at another level, I think that platforms like this Zoom have really allowed us to do amazing work within the world and still be able to show up for those communities that we serve.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing, and of course, also a double-edged sword, right? I mean, you live in the Bahamas, and so it's a remote island. So for you to be able to connect with the wider astrological community in general, I'm sure, being able to
Hmm.
tap into the World Wide Web has been part of your work since the
Hmm.
start in that regard. And I do think it's wonderful. Like, I mean, one thing that I'm hearing from you that I love is like, look, art and
Hmm.
embodiment and movement
Hmm.
is non-essential. Like that's just how
Yeah.
it's always going to be. Um, but yeah, having to shut down your yoga studio, I mean, is that part of your own personal movement towards more full-time astrology, or is that just something that's happened as a result? Like, how are you feeling about it?
Well, at the moment, it's something that I think I wanted to do for a while. And as I look back on my life and some of the decisions that I've made regarding staying in the Bahamas, even a lot of it has been based on the fact that I have been a business owner. For most of my adult life, I've been a business owner, and I haven't been able to move with the freedom that I wanted to as a result of that. And so, a big part of my thought process for the last couple of years has been migrating to Canada, to Vancouver. And in preparation for that, I've been flying to Vancouver once a year in order to teach for like a month every time so that I could really begin to develop a community there. And I think I've done a pretty good job at doing that. So now with closing the studio down, I mean, it is a point of heartache for me because I look at it and not even so much from the memories standpoint, because I think that I had separated myself from the emotional connection to it for quite a while. But I think as a very earth-based person with a very earthy chart, I look at it as this investment of time and money and effort that I made for my entire adult life, basically. And it really feels bad in that way because I think in the back of my mind, my consideration is, well, dude, if you were going to close this down in any event, why didn't you do it 4 years ago? You know? So I think there's that. But at the same time, I'm completely willing to see what free spaces open up in my life as a result of no longer being a business owner. I'm thrilled, I'm excited, I'm terrified, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. I feel all the things regarding this. But fundamentally, I'm happy to start a new chapter.
But you're still a business owner, right? Because Oraculos School of
Yeah.
Astrology, you as a independent counselor and teacher,
Yeah.
and but let me ask you this because I am, I'm loving, I guess, the opportunity for many of us to like we're literally kind of forced to slow down right now. It feels very
Hmm.
Saturnian. It feels like you're being put in this corner and it's kind of like think about who you are and what you've did and
Yep.
what you've been up to and more importantly like what is the dream for the future. But I really am so afraid about this like forced separation. There's this
Hmm.
connection through the internet, which can be so much more global and in a sense more freeing. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure you are experiencing, as I am, so many communities where people can finally be themselves
Hmm.
because it's not maybe happening for them with their, local neighborhood or city or state or whatever it may be. But I
Right.
also fear this just like separation, this plugging in only kind of virtually. So my
Right.
question for you is, if it had to be one or the other, would you prefer to have an astrology school that is like a global online community, or a place on Earth in nature where there are just astrologers living together in community?
Wow. Brett, I have a feeling that I don't know, you've either read my birth chart or you read my autobiography because my entire thing in life is to have an established presence on the earth. And I have a most Saturnian chart. My sun is square Saturn, my moon is trine Saturn, my Mercury is sextile Saturn, Saturn is sextiling my ascendant. So in a lot of ways, everything that is personal about me is tied in with Saturn, which is good and also sometimes a little bit burdensome. But fundamentally, I desire deeply to have an established presence in the earth, which means that yes, I do want to own a location. Um, Growing up watching X-Men and watching Harry Potter and all that stuff, I always wanted to create a college of sorts or a school for the gifted or a school where I could train people in a lot of the esoteric studies that I grew up with as a child. And I'm really passionate about opening that sort of school. And at the same time, I acknowledge that Zoom has really opened up this landscape of possibilities for me because at the moment, I'm currently running my Renaissance Astrology Summer Intensive, in which I'm taking intermediate level astrologers through a process of how to read charts blind without any background information about the person, but just teaching them real solid blind chart reading. And these people, they've come in from all over the world. I have a student who signs in from the UK, I have students in America, I have students in Jamaica, um, students in the Bahamas. So I have kind of already tapped into this global concept of a school online, but at the same time, there's nothing that would fulfill my heart more than to actually own land and turn that land into this sort of magical, mystical, astrologically based place for excellence in learning that I think is really a part of my destiny.
I like hearing that, and I'll see you there. And of course, why not do both? But I'm
Yeah.
really interested in following something that came up there because you said sharing like the esoteric
Mm-hmm.
path that you've been on since you were young. So how did the kind of esoteric and occult tradition first find itself to you, Mychal?
Wow. Um, so one, this is the first interview I've ever done about this. You're the first person to invite me on for an interview, so I'm really thrilled. Um,
Oh, the interviewer gets interviewed.
Most definitely. So this is a new seat for me to be in because I'm on the receiving end, but I'm really deeply thrilled about this. And two, I've never had to like talk about my story before in this way, so I'm really excited. So thanks for asking that question. Um, but in terms of how the occult and specifically the Western mystery tradition found me, it was through a study of the Kabbalistic tarot and Hermeticism. And I came to that at the age of 12 by way of the Unity Center of Light, which is a metaphysical church in the Bahamas and around the world. And they had attached to them a metaphysical bookstore called the Way of Life Metaphysical Bookstore. And that's where I bought my first tarot deck. And fortunately for me, I never entered tarot in a flippant sort of popular tarot sort of way. So I never had the dummy's guide to learning the tarot or anything like that. I started off with these heavy hitting old school tarot books that were founded on the Golden Dawn as a mystery tradition in the West. And because it was founded on the Golden Dawn, it also was founded on this very deep and rich astro mythology that informed everything about it. So at 12 years old, I was sitting down reading the likes of Arthur Edward Waite and Aleister Crowley, and not shortly after that, people like Paul Foster Case and all of these luminaries who didn't just create tarot or who didn't just pioneer tarot as a fortune telling method, but they also pioneered tarot as this compendium or this filing cabinet of all of the world's astrological wisdom within those 78 cards. So because of that, I came into astrology because it was so deeply a part of the tarot that I was studying. And um, not to run on for so long, but because that specific branch of the Golden Dawn at that time was before they had discovered Pluto, and it was also when they were trying to figure out what to do with Uranus and Neptune, they defaulted naturally onto Ptolemy. And Ptolemy is the seven visible planets, or Ptolemy only speaks about the seven visible planets, and Ptolemy is the basis for all of our classical astrology. So my entry point into astrology was via classical astrology, which I realize is really uncommon for a lot of people because you usually get into astrology through modern astrology. But because of that passion of mine, I got in through classical astrology, and it took a while before I even found out about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which, as a traditional astrologer, or I dare say, as a neo-traditional astrologer, I do definitely use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But it took a while for them to make their way into my astrology because I was just growing up being fed from this classical astrological source.
Beautiful. And by the way, definitely don't worry about running on. I could listen all day. I'd just love to read that book. Yeah, our friend Gary Caton, I know, has been doing a lot of work recently with the Deacon correspondences,
Mm-hmm.
the minor arcana.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's been around since like the Rider-Waite
Precisely.
tradition, at least, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Tarot is so amazing to me because we don't really know exactly when it began, and we can see these
Mm-hmm.
really important movements like that movement in the Golden Dawn tradition that you're speaking
Mm-hmm.
of. And for me, it kind of gives me permission to release this idea that we actually know when astrology herself came onto the scene, that there's something deeper and maybe more esoteric that was kind of preserved for the mystery students, before it came more into the exoteric reality with the,
Yeah.
really through conquering, it seems like, in the Hellenistic era and all that. So
Right.
I digress, I guess. But yeah, I mean, love to hear about that it's classical astrology that first brought you in, and what different branches of astrology have most spoken to you in your own synthesis. Where do you which astrology branches are you referencing?
Brett, when I speak about astrology, I'm speaking about the gamut of astrology, which for me is organized as Horary astrology, which is the divinational branch of astrology, even though I think at some level, if you practice astrology long enough, you come to this realization that the entire corpus of astrology is fundamentally divination based. But horary astrology and then electional astrology is another aspect. And then natal astrology and mundane astrology. So these four branches of classical astrology have been branches that I've explored deeply within my life. But in terms of the practical work that we do with clients on a day-to-day level and that I do with clients on a daily basis, it would have to be horary astrology and natal astrology. And that's where I've really established my roots and also where I've been creating a name for myself for the past 15 years almost. And I really feel as if those are the places where we essentially are of the most value and of the most helpfulness within the lives of people. Because uh, there's something very self-serving about studying, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, about studying traditional astrology purely from a theoretical perspective or purely from a technical perspective. And I think we actually need to ground our astrology always into how does this astrology help human beings and how does this astrology help people live life? Because without that, then we're just stuck in our ivory towers, disconnected from the places where astrology is actually most effectual, which is in the lives of people.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think about that on a mundane context as well, right? So I was speaking earlier about how, we would never want to say this time of crisis and confusion and pain is a win for anything. But I do feel that many people who were, not, I guess, astrology deniers or just wouldn't take a look,
Mm-hmm.
like were enough on the fringe that they were hearing astrologers speak about how 2020 is going to change everything and you might want to prepare and stuff. And so I have a lot of not really clients, but like friends and people in the outer circle who've been like, wow, those things that you were saying, or,
Right.
family members who took the advice to get out of the stock market at a certain time or whatever. But
Right.
on a larger context, let's say the world did listen, right? I mean, let's say that we were able to perfect our craft to the point where we were able to more accurately predict, global phenomena and weather and such. But I think more importantly, like cultural weather, like this thing that's
Hmm.
happening now. Why does it matter? How can we use that positively? And is there a potential pitfall of, being the harbingers of disaster and forcing the world to manifest an experience that maybe otherwise would have passed by or shown up in a less aggressive expression?
Mm. Mm. I think that's a really significant point that you raise, and it's a point that was raised even by Ptolemy over 2,000 years ago in the Tetrabiblos, where he fundamentally speaks about the difficulty that we find ourselves in the process of prognostication, which is making any sort of prediction. And it's a tough one because, as we know, our astrology is holographic. So at once, transit is referring to something that is physical, but it's also referring to something that is spiritual and emotional and mental and psychological. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, is this going to be impactful on a global level, or is this going to be impactful from me personally? So I think that when we practice a holographic crafts like astrology, we really have to take into consideration the fact that at any given moment in astrological time, we're essentially speaking about multiple possibilities. And I think the skillfulness of the astrologer is to be able to go within that ocean of multiple possibilities and pull from it something that is tangible and salient and real. And that comes through years of experience, but that also comes through something that I think is a bit innate, because at that level, we're operating not just from a technical basis of astrology, but also from a truly divine and prophetic level of astrology, which I think many of us tap into time and time again within our astrological practice. But to be able to hold that space of divine prophecy through astrology consistently over an extended period of time, I think that that is something that is a bit difficult because, like enlightenment, it's not something that you can just turn on or turn off. And while we do have glimpses of this experience within our human experience, um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many year long or 2 year long or 10 year long courses we'd have to take before we can actively initiate this level of divinely imbued prophetic potential that we have seen before in astrology uh, in a number of cases, but it's not something that I think we can turn on to the point of it being uh, to the point of it being automatic. But then I think the other question, and I'm going to shut up right now. But I think the other question is is it supposed to be something that we're supposed to turn on? Is it supposed to be something that we're able to consistently be able to do on a global scale? And I think that this brings up the thing that I was speaking about before, where I said that astrology is really most impactful, at least within my practice, within the lives of clients and within the lives of people. So I think the greater philosophical question is: are we supposed to be practicing an astrology that's fundamentally rooted in the prediction of world events, or are we quote unquote supposed to be practicing an astrology that is rooted within the lives of individual people? Because if the answer is the latter, then I think that a lot of us do tap into this divinely prophetic gift within our astrology practice, within our work with clients, because I mean, you sit down and you take someone through their transits and their solar arcs for the last 10 years of their lives, and it rings true to them. So, um, in conclusion, I think it's a matter of scope. Like, how big do you need for your astrological quote unquote prophetic ability to be? Does it need to be global, or are you satisfied with just bringing magic and profundity to the lives of individual people?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, as is the question of if it's global, can it matter? How does it matter? And but then on a personal level too, right? If you see a tidal wave coming,
Mm-hmm.
how to consult somebody around that. And I'm always interested in this idea, are we as astrologers helping people prepare, or sometimes are we pushing them into, manifesting an experience? And it comes into some matters of like fate versus free will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always a wonderful question, but it's a lifelong question. There's another question that a kind
Mm-hmm.
of general theme that comes up that I really want to tap into with you, which is intuition versus technique. But before I'll plant that seed, but before I ask that officially, I just want to reflect, it's so often I think as astrologers that we're looking at global themes. We're looking at, for example, the gathering of the Capricorn Council that's
Mm-hmm.
happening right now, or the coming, air sign epoch, in a sense, beginning full stop with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius and December
Mm-hmm.
solstice of this year, or whatever, and then so often I think, as for me as an astrologer, I will take these global themes and then see where that fits an individual. Or I have so many sessions with amazing beings who were born during that powerful time of the mid 60s when Uranus and Pluto were aligned. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, oh, cool. Well, how is this seed of that moment expressed? How are they a member of this global thing?
Right.
But one thing that I'm fascinated by is like, well, what if we had no kind of global insight and we were just sitting with so many individuals? And you
Mm-hmm.
know how this is with our sessions. Like, you'll sit with people where this is the theme for like a month. And
Right.
it's uncanny. Like, so many charts are showing up that just say this and this. And for me, it's like, oh, cool, because I need to learn that. I need to learn how that's
Right.
in me. And, but I think it'd be really amazing if somehow we were able to just experience in so many individual charts, like what's actually happening for the whole globe. Do you know what I'm saying by
Mm-hmm.
that?
Definitely. Definitely. And I love the fact that you brought that up because that was something that I had asked within myself for a while. Because as I look back on a lot of the readings that I gave for 2019 about people asking questions about 2020 and whether or not they should take this job and whether or not they should stay in this relationship and what will be the outcome if they do X, Y, or Z, I find that as I look back through those readings, which I'm hoping to do now because I'm integrating my past readings into the book that I'm writing on Horary astrology and the natal promise. But as I look back, I realized that there was continuously this theme within all of those charts that seemed prohibitive. And there was continuously this theme that seemed like, okay, hitherto thou hast come, but no further, to quote the Bible. And there seemed to be this uncanny, eerily specific sense of, yes, you should change your job, but there's some stuff going on in the background that you're going to want to be aware of. And in about 3 months' time, things are going to shift significantly. But yeah, change the job. or, or yeah, this relationship has really come to an end, and slash or but there are some other things going on underneath the surface that you're going to want to become aware of within 3 months' time. So just know that. And as I look back at that, and also, let's face it, hindsight is 2020. So any one of us could see the evidence of 2020, and it's ironic that, wow, it's ironic that 2020 is this concept that we use when we speak to refer to clarity. And here we are in 2020 when so much things are being both hidden from us as well as being made clear to us. But I think that's another rabbit hole altogether. But the point that I'm making is that looking back, at my past client readings, it seemed as if there was a movement greater than the specific questions that they were asking that hinted or intimated towards something happening that would completely reroute them, whether they liked it or not. And I mean, 2020 has completely been that. But I don't want to be that person who says, well, if you look at Exhibit A and if you look at this thing that I said to you 3 months ago, then you'll see that blah, blah. Because I think that um, if there was something to be said, it should have been said in that moment. But I definitely do agree with you that we can use our client based work and our work with individual people to get a cosmic pulse of what's going on within the world around us.
Yeah, and I love that you're looking back at these old readings for your book. Like that's always incredibly informative, right? And to look at our own growth. And I mean, I think there's something also if you see something very clearly, like I mean, sometimes people just need the yes or the no, and horary
Mm-hmm.
astrology is such a gift for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people absolutely do not need a yes or a no,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
right, instead of, as they say, like instead of give a man a fish, teach a man two fish. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
better as a counselor to like leave it open because it's a person stepping into their own power that's
Mm-hmm.
going to create the great shift and you feel into that. So I mean it's impossible for me not to at least voice that all I want to do now is have a 5 hour conversation about what you just said in regard to things being hidden and being revealed. But that is a totally different rabbit hole and one that
Right.
I'm just too excited to explore. So let's still use that theme. You know, I think as a counselor, a lot of it comes down to what to say, what not to say, very
Mm-hmm.
importantly, what not to say, like how to give that essential information in such a way that it's going to be received without fear or the
Right.
weight of responsibility. And you know, and it tunes into this thing of like, well, intuition versus technique, right? Because the technique's not always going to tell me, you know, how I should be speaking or what I should share with the client. You know, it's going to show me what there is to share, but there has to be some level of a filter, which for me is actually the thing as I'm maturing as a counselor, like that compassion, empathy, and that filter of how to say things. That's what's growing most in me, even as my astrology, my techniques growing too. So I
Right.
think this is probably super supported by an astrologer like yourself who came in through the gateway of the tarot, where there certainly is very solid technique to tarot, right? But it also feels very much to me, at least in my experience with the cards, that it's accessing um, this image of the dream and this image of the archetypal reality beyond this reality that can be less rigid and a little bit more open than astrology can be, especially when we get into traditional astrology and medieval and electional and horary and that. First of all, do you agree with that? And if so, what would you say that how has that helped you on your path?
Well, that's a really good point that you bring up there, Brett. And I think what, so for me personally, my journey with traditional astrology has been quite different from that of a lot of my colleagues because I do tend to find a certain mm, a certain rigidity in traditional astrology, oftentimes when I interact with other colleagues who are also in this field. And I do admit that that rigidity is oftentimes crippling because it doesn't allow for astrology to blossom and grow into a vision of futurity. And for me personally, this vision and this call to the future is fundamentally what fuels everything that I do. And just to go back to the point that you made on horary astrology and its capacity or its reputation for only giving a yes or a no, horary astrology is a lot more nuanced than that. And I think that it's slightly unfortunate that the modern perception of it and I'm not saying that this is specifically what you said, but I know that a lot of people think that horary is only used for facilitating a yes or a no. And while coming to the final judgment on a matter is oftentimes what happens within a horary chart, because a horary chart and the practice of horary astrology specifically teaches you how to be objective in very clear ways that may not necessarily be facilitated in other branches of astrology. So there's that. But then there's also a very nuanced way of coming to any answer. And I mean, fine, I know some people who just go for the jugular and they say yes or no. But I think that horary is best when it acknowledges the humanity of the person who is receiving the reading. And in acknowledging that humanity, there is counseling that takes place. There is this deep understanding of why do you feel as if you're in the situation that you're in right now with this person who you're in a relationship with? What is the power dynamic between the two of you? How is it you feel fundamentally thwarted essentially based on how you've been characterized within this relationship? How is it you're projecting some of your own stuff on this other person, or is this other person projecting things onto you? So I mean, the horary chart isn't just a yes or no methodology, but it also enriches this deeper understanding of why you are where you are and where you may potentially go next. And the specific branch or the specific style of horary that I practice is, I dare say, very, I don't want to use humanistic because I know that that belongs to a very specific branch or style of astrology, but it is very human based. And everything that I do is very human based. And that's my approach with horary, and that's my approach with tarot, and that's my approach with everything, with even just natal astrology, because I think that the astrology has to come back to the person, to the individual, to the human, which is at once an act of holding a space within a person's life as a shaman or a priest or whatever you call it, or an oracle for them, but it's also holding the space of being a healer and being a psychopomp and being someone who is able to ferry their souls into another state of being when they need healing the most. And I think that as astrologers, we have to acknowledge that this psychopomp job of the astrologer is very much part and parcel of what we do, because we are ferrymen of souls. We are Mercury taking someone down, oftentimes into the underworld of their experience, and bringing them to the summerlands, you know, to get mythological about it. But we're meant to serve as, and I know that the word prophet has a heavy connotation that's oftentimes biblical, but I think that we're meant to serve this role as both prophet and healer within the lives of people who come to us. And if we're only serving that role of giving someone a degree from heaven, or not a degree, but if we're only serving that role of giving someone a divine decree from heaven that this is what your chart says and therefore that's it, but we're not also serving the role of being a healer within the process of that, I think that we're doing our astrology and also our clients a grave injustice.
Agreed. Here, here. Yeah, and then also being that psychopomp that not only brings somebody into the underworld and back, but also maybe brings them into the higher realms and brings them into this future and shows them this person that they can be when they choose to release some things that keeps them from going there gladly, etc., you know. But yeah, I mean, I love so much like your expression of the intimacy in the compassion of horary, that it's not just some like computer code, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even getting after the real question that somebody's asking is such a piece of this, right? Somebody saying, well, I'm thinking about taking this job. What do you think? But the question they're really asking is, I'm
Precisely.
thinking about taking this job so I can be financially self-reliant, so I can leave this marriage that doesn't work and finally leave
Mm-hmm.
the town where I grew up, you know? And it's like, it's such a different question. And it really does take the healer and the open ear and open heart, and the partner in session to help get after actually the true question that's being asked. And I love also that you voice and I'll even say defend and educate about the nuances of the horary, because it would be hard, I believe, to come to from like what I believe without knowing yet, because I haven't read anything, but what I believe your book is getting after without having that nuanced and open-hearted and humanistic point of view. So, yeah, would you tell us a little bit about Horary and the natal promise?
Well, I also acknowledge that I didn't actually answer the first question that you asked,
You
which was,
answered the question that mattered, though, right?
well, I think that the question that you asked also is important insofar as where do I think intuition and technique come into the equation of the practice that we do, and it's a very important question. And if you don't mind giving me a moment to just go into that, I really want to flesh out my thoughts about intuition and technique.
I would love to, of course.
Okay, so what I find in terms of this, even backing up beyond that, your astrology and your divination is meant to be a bridge between you and the divine. And I mean, period. And what I teach my students who come to me for to study divination, and I mean, how I teach my students is very specific, because when someone comes to me to learn astrology for the first time, they're learning a general course in astrology that ultimately leads them to horary, because horary trains the mind of the astrologer in a way like no other branch of astrology can. And we can go into that later. But in teaching them what is horary, I have to teach them what is divination. And divination is essentially the art and science of creating an established bridge of communication between you and the divine via an established symbolic language. And in astrology, we use the sky as our established symbolic language. That is how we strike a conversation with the divine. But I think that it's important for us to continuously remember that after you've studied for years and years, and after you've read your 400 books, and after you've done all of your technical studying to understand the technique and the praxis of a thing, there is something numinous beyond the veil of materiality that you're meant to pierce into. And oftentimes the astrological study can tend to be so technical that you're just regurgitating what you read in Robert Pelletier's book on planets, on planetary aspects, or what you read in Macavers and March's book on the only way to learn astrology. There's this point of parroting astrology that I think happens. And I think it happens more amongst raw beginners than it does among seasoned practitioners, even though I know that there are seasoned practitioners who continue to practice astrology in this very textbook sort of way. But there's something that someone told me once, and I can't remember who, but I'll never forget it. But that there's this concept that there's these 4 stages to developing competency at something. In the beginning, you start something, you are unconsciously incompetent. You're bad and you don't know that you're bad. Like, oh, you want to be a dancer and you think that you're a dancer because you've danced around your home every single day of your life. And so you're unconsciously incompetent. You think you're great, but you haven't really done the work yet to attain greatness. And then you decide, well, hey, I'm going to go to a dance studio and take a class and take the advanced class, because guess what? I've been dancing in my living room since King Hatchet was a hammer, and I am a prima donna of my living room as far as dance is concerned. And you go to an advanced dance class, and there you find out that you're not as good as you thought. You're actually not good at all. You have no training whatsoever. And then you move into the second stage of mastery, which is becoming consciously incompetent. And I love that. And I relish that experience of becoming and knowing and seeing myself as consciously incompetent at something, because it gives me the fuel to become great at that thing.
Yeah, the
And then
example I love to share, sorry to butt in, but is
go ahead.
like walking, like when you go to study Qigong and they're like,
Mm-hmm,
yeah, you think you're a master of walking. Like, let's
mm-hmm,
become conscious of how you don't walk right, you know?
precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And I mean, it's the same thing. And I know that you, Brett, you're a musician, and you, well, I don't know exactly what your journey with music has been like, but I'm sure that you had to go through the stage of becoming consciously incompetent and realizing, hey, like, this is really hard stuff. Like, I actually have to dedicate time to be good at playing the saxophone or playing the flute, you know? Um,
Yeah, that's where I'm living right now, for sure. And then like a lot of the work is to become very conscious of the parts of me
mhm,
that wants to be consciously incompetent instead
mhm,
of
mhm,
unconsciously competent, you know?
mhm. And then the last two stages of this is that as you move forward, you then become consciously competent. You have started your training, you've put in your 10 hours a day to get good at what you're trying to get good at, and then you become very consciously competent in this very structured and rigid and technical sort of way. You become good in a way that is applaudable by your environment because you put in the work to become good. But it's not just enough to be consciously competent. You want to move into a place where you are unconsciously competent, where someone can wake you up in the middle of the night and you can deliver an orchestral suite. Someone's able to wake you up in the middle of the night and you're able to function at your highest level because it's become so deeply a part of your muscle memory, so deeply a part of your cellular memory that you, in essence, become your art. And this question of where does intuition fit in and where does technique fit in, I think technique really is that bridge between the neophyte astrologer moving from being consciously incompetent to consciously competent. That entire process is a process of becoming technically good at your craft. That is the process of becoming a craftsman, but you're still not yet a master. And I think that after you have sat with astrology for years and have poured over charts, real live chart examples of real live clients, that becomes the secondary bridge between your technique and your intuition. Because intuition, and this is my final piece, and please forgive me for rambling. I have Mercury in Aries and conjunct my IC, and I talk incessantly. So please, if you need to tell me to shut up, Brett, please do so.
That's the last thing I need.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So my final point is that my final point is that after you've become technically proficient at your craft, the technique that you've ingested within yourself, the way in which you've turned yourself into a living library, then becomes the fertile ground for intuition to grow. But I think that the fundamental issue that we have in these fields of spiritual counseling, whether they be astrology or tarot or the I Ching or Runemal, the study of the runes, whatever it is, I think that the fundamental issue that we have, especially today, is that never before has there been an environment where people, well, let me not say that because I'm not sure about before, but never before has there really been a field that requires mastery where people feel as if they can just enter the field and wing it based on their intuition. And unfortunately, I think that things like tarot and astrology, they lend themselves to the novice as something that, oh, I was born to do, or oh, I'm just naturally good at, or oh, give me a chart and I'll read it intuitively, when there's actually an art and a craft to this stuff. And so we need to have that technical background, because your intuition doesn't just emerge out of a vacuum. Your intuition grows based on the creative connections that are subconsciously being made within you, within the different technical things that you've already inculcated within yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens everywhere. It's just harder to fake it, you know? I mean, like, if somebody's out in the street playing terrible music, nobody's going to stop and listen. And because we have more of an experience of what terrible music feels like than what terrible astrology feels like, right?
Mm,
Um, but
hmm.
on the other side
Wow.
of this, I think there's a really important, you know, and I love the musical metaphor because the greatest musicians I know, they did not learn from technique, like, or theory, I should say at least. Like, of course, technique,
Right.
like learning to play your instrument and letting the instrument play you and merging, that's the thing. But then it's really about communicating that language of spirit, which music is,
Hmm.
and, and having a wordless language and communication with others and, co-creating music. It's one of the most profound experiences. But so I know so many great musicians who really didn't know their notes or their chords or like the theory, right?
Right.
And learn to play by ear, as they say. And for me, those have been like the most natural musicians. But then the greatest musicians I know, they started that way, which I did not, and I've kind of felt hung up by that. But they started that way, and then later they added the theory. And
Mm.
then it's like they already knew kind of the intuitive piece, the quality piece, you know, just being a musician. And then they added this quantity piece, and it took them to a whole other level.
Hmm.
And I think that can happen too for astrologers as well. But it's like, okay, well, what is the astrology I learned to play by ear? Because, I mean, back before I even knew what astrology was or what a glyph meant or triplicity, quadruplicity,
Right.
what have you, right? And the answer is it's how to be a human being.
Right.
So, I mean, like, part of my contribution to our field is like assisting astrologers to see the astronomy of the astrology again. And it's amazing how, things that we've experienced as human beings every day, like the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, like many astrologers don't see primary motion in the chart because we're so used to Aries to Taurus to Gemini or transiting from the third to the fourth, fifth house, etc., right? But it's
Right.
like, what do you experience when you go outside? And so I think there is also part of when we're developing this technique, so much of the intuitive and the compassionate side, it is derived in, our experiences just in living as a conscious human being. But then we can very consciously reconnect that piece, which I think is the source of our intuition, with our technique, with, our many different ways that we approach a chart and become more of a complete astrologer. I really feel like that's kind of the edge for me right now. It's like how when I add more and more techniques, and of course they're endless, how
Hmm.
do I also match that study with the allowance of allowing my own humanity to develop too?
I think what we both agree on, Brett, is that, and I mean, I feel as if we're both in agreement about the majority of this, is that your astrology should make you more humane, and your astrology should bring you more deeply in touch with your humanity. Because essentially, as astrologers, tarot readers, what have you, we are curators of the human experience. We have signed up to being living libraries of the experiences of everyone who we've ever given a reading to. And those people's stories, they come out in every chart reading we give, because your understanding of Uranus conjunct the first house comes from every chart where you've seen Uranus conjunct the first house. And so while there is a technical textbook thing that you can read about it, what you know about astrology comes from what you've experienced within astrology, and it comes from what you've learned through your actual life of living with with people and hearing about their stories and hearing about their lives.
That's so
Um,
beautiful, Michael. I want to interrupt you there because, you know, will Uranus in the first express itself the same for every astrologer, right? So if I read a book, it says this equals that, right? But
right.
what you're saying is that the true book is through our experience. And as astrologers, as counselors, we're consistently, whether we're tuned into it or not, and more so if we are, we're consistently learning from this book of our experience with clients and clients' charts. So if I see Uranus in the first, your example, for so many people, I start to get a more, intimate understanding of what that is. But what I wonder is, am I sitting with clients who will offer that experience of Uranus in the first, and it's a different set of the clients that have Uranus in the first that you will sit with because you and I are meant to have a bit of a different nuance or experience of what that signature is?
Mm.
Or is it a thing and it's going to show up that way for all of us?
You know, it, it's funny that we're speaking about Uranus in the first. One, not just because I have Uranus in the first, because I do, but I think what's interesting about this is that I have recently been getting an even deeper education in the outer planets and also in Chiron in the past readings that I've been doing for all of 2020. And I'm not even speaking about them in terms of transits or anything. I'm speaking about them in terms of them in people's natal charts, either strongly angular or strongly aspecting their ascendant or their sun or their moon or whatever. And that education isn't something that I could have found in a book. And I mean, I have the Chiron book that was written by, I think, Melanie Reinhardt. It's on my bookshelf someplace. I never read it. But I feel that the education that I'm receiving right now in the outer planets and in Chiron is something that I could never, I couldn't pay money for. I absolutely couldn't pay money for it. And at the end of the day, going back to this theme of intuition versus technique, uh, I think what kind of makes astrology different from music, and definitely there are many parallels between them insofar as both astrology and music are meant to give people an experience of something that isn't material. It's meant to give people an experience of God, goddess, the universe, you know? But I think what's different about them is that, different and the same, but different is that astrology, when I think about it more in terms of learning a new language, which also music is a language. But so I speak fluent Spanish, and I know what it was like being an English speaker living in Cuba, having to learn how to speak Spanish. And I know that I couldn't wing. I definitely couldn't wing speaking Spanish in the same way that when I studied French because I was going to France, I couldn't wing studying French, you see? So I think in the same way that you can't really wing speaking a language, either you speak that language or you don't, I think astrology is a little bit more along the lines of a language, whereas, like, do you even know that Mercury moves faster than Venus, and therefore Mercury is going to be applying to Venus, not necessarily the other way around, unless it's retrograde? Like, do you know the relationship of planets to each other and just what a planet is within itself? Because I think those things demand that we study. And I think that if you're going to have a nuanced understanding of Saturn, yes, you observe Saturn within your own life, but you also have to read or learn from someone, or however your particular preference of education is. Like, what does astrology say, or what did astrology say before you came to it? Because it's really important that we have that tradition, whether it's tradition based on the 17th century or whether it's tradition based on Dane Rudyard. I think it's important for all of us to have an understanding of what was said before us in terms of astrology so that we can actually speak astrologies. Um, because if not, then we're just kind of making stuff up, which is probably well, I can't even say that it's a good thing because I don't necessarily think that it is.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, man, I just want to be on for like 3 hours, and I have a client in 14 minutes. So I want to make sure that we touch into the Queer Astrology Conference because it's a
Right.
beautiful thing that a lot more people are going to be able to access since it's an online gathering now. I mean, I think that to me seems really challenging. Like I just spoke, finger quotes in the air at NORWAC, and it's been one of my favorite times of the year when I'm together with fellow astrologers. I mean, we know that being an astrologer can be a very alienating experience for people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so to be able to get together with our peers and to speak this language in the halls is such an amazing thing. And I mean, I think the Queer Astrology Conference, right, that's like on a whole nother level of that experience, right? People who have felt like they can't connect in with their tribe,
Right.
is a identifying being in whatever realm it is, including as an astrologer. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a lovely thing that that's going to be more available to people. And I'm sure, as we saw with Norwalk and with many of these gatherings, like the heart is still there, the gathering's still there. Somehow we're remembering how to do that, and maybe even in this, remote access, developing new ways of connecting and doing that. But it also just feels like a drag to not be able to meet in person. Have you spoken at the Queer Astrology Conference in the past?
I haven't spoken at the conference in the past, and so I'm really excited to be speaking at this one. And I'm going to be speaking pretty much on what we're talking about right now, horary. Well, we're actually not talking specifically about it right now, but horary astrology and the natal promise, which is the title of my upcoming book. But it's also a big part of the work I'm doing right now to show how the horary moment, you coming to receive a horary consultation in the moment, is tied in with a greater promise that is already inbuilt within your natal chart. And there is no horary question independent of the natal chart. And indeed, you can't ask a question unless something has been triggered within your natal chart that brings that question to the forefront of your mind. And so it's a bit of a rabbit hole because it shows how the horary moment ties back into the natal chart, and how what's reflected in both the horary moment and the natal chart are also reflected in your soul return chart for that year. And it just shows this multi-layered approach of how, once again, this holograph of astrology uh, contains everything. And you can ask a question today on the 7th of June, the 7th of July, 2020 at 3:19 p.m. and have a specific chart for this moment. But that chart for this moment will also in some way tie back into your natal chart in ways that are absolutely profound and uncanny and shocking, because I think the bigger question is like, what is the causal link between the two of these things? And because there is no causal link, it causes us to question something even deeper about our astrology, and also deeper about this concept of fate versus free will. So I'm really excited to talk about it, as you can see. And yeah, that's going to be at the Queer Astrology Conference this weekend. I hope that people sign up for it because it's going to be a really, really great adventure.
Yeah, so queerastrology.com to sign for the conference. It's July 10th to the 12th, 2020. I'm also just wondering about the schedule and when you're speaking, so I'm looking online right now. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know offhand, Michael, which date and time your lecture is?
I I'm going to have to go back and check for sure, because I have been planning to send out all of the invitations this week for it, but I haven't really been the best in
I
terms of
hear you. So
scheduling.
I'm gonna let you know. I just cast a chart and came up with Sunday, July 12th at 3 p.m.
That
Um,
sounds about right.
I think these times, these are all Eastern Daylight Time. So the time zone from which you are communicating, Michael, I want to be able to speak for just hours and hours and hours, and I know that will be true someday. And I really look forward to some time that we can spend together. under the starry sky and just share. I do, the Horary and the Natal promise, this word promise is something that we hear
Hmm.
so often from the traditional authors. And I
Yeah.
think that modern astrologers want to lean more towards potential than promise.
Hmm.
And I wonder sometimes if, a thing is in a chart that it's going to have to happen. But as you were kind of saying before, there's so many different fractals or so many different ways a thing can express.
Hmm.
But is it your feeling that if it's in the chart, it's going to happen in one way or another, or we can like miss the opportunity or maybe escape the drama of a particular thing through the way that we choose to stay asleep or further awaken?
Well, Brett, I feel that we all live out the fullness of our nativities within the context and the course of our lives. And I think that if there's something in your natal chart, it's if there's something in your natal chart, if you have a full, unbroken life, and by full, I mean if you live to old age, I think that we all live out everything that's in our nativities. And once again, I don't think that we avoid things in our natal charts, but I think that how we express them may be really individual and specific. So, do you express your sun opposed Pluto by becoming a power hungry mass murderer or something? Or do you express that by becoming a transformational leader of people who can take people deeper into an understanding of themselves? And I think that it's up to the skillful astrologer to interpret at what level of the spectrum you're manifesting that. But I definitely do know from my own experience that if given enough time, we all live out the fullness of our natal charts. Because if we didn't, then a lot of the work that I do in terms of blind readings and in terms of I mean, well, that's really the brunt of it. A lot of that work wouldn't be possible because I operate when I'm doing blind readings, which is very different from my consultative work because counseling is different from giving a blind reading. A blind reading is showing how this thing can be done, whereas counseling is working one on one with the person to bring them to a healing outcome. But the blind reading and the consultation serve two completely different purposes. Um, but the final thing that I want to say about this is that the whole premise of giving a blind reading is that there is a story within your nativity already. And if there weren't a story within the nativity that could be told, then with very specific, sometimes, granular detail, then, I mean, this whole concept of giving a blind reading wouldn't be possible. And this whole concept of the natal promise also wouldn't be possible.
Well said. And friends out there, you can see why when you go to the Queer Astrology Conference this weekend, do not miss Mychal's talk. And so again, queerastrology.com is the way to find out about the Queer Astrology Conference, July 10th to the 12th, 2020. You can find Mychal at oraculosastrology.com. So Oraculos astrology.com. Check out his True Divination podcast. There's many episodes you can find at YouTube that are entirely enlightening. And Mychal, I'm just really honored by you taking the time to share with me, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations in the future.
Most definitely, Brett. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And this was my first interview, like I said. So thank you for giving me this opportunity because it really means the world to me.
Yeah, man, I'll say you did really well on that side of the chair. Uh, no reason to put yourself in check for long shares because that's what you are here for. And I'm really excited to check out some of the blind readings I know that we can access. Can we find those at oraculosastrology.com or the Facebook page, or where's the best place to go to look at some of these blind readings that you've posted?
They're on YouTube. They're on YouTube as well. So if you go on YouTube and type in the True Divination podcast and subscribe to my channel, you'll find everything that I posted there. And I try to post two things a week. One is an interview with a world famous astrologer or an astrologer who's just making waves within our community. And so definitely this month I'm bringing out my interview with Gemini Brett. And also I try to post one blind reading a week as well, so that you have the best of those two worlds.
Many Saturn aspects indeed. All right, Mychal. Thanks again, brother. I will see you in space until next time. And yeah, keep the dream alive and keep riding that wave and showing many of us how to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.